I've got a very special video for you today because Mark Barber, who is the author of the first ever Infinity novel, Downfall, joins me via Zoom, and I've got a whole bunch of questions. So, Mark, you have written a lot of fiction for Gates of Antares, Kings of War. You've done campaign books. You've been a military consultant for Osprey Publishing. You've brought a lot of fiction to life. How did you get into writing these sorts of books for popular war games?
Oh man, it's that kind of came at the end of the whole journey in a weird sort of way. So the same as a lot of people, I guess. I'd really got into Games Workshop in my like early teens, and the narrative style of play as well. And when you start to think of when you're younger and you're kind of thinking of the cool stories behind your characters. So by the time I went to university, I one of my minor modules I did was in creative writing. And I tried and tried and tried to get published out of that, and just like a lot of aspiring authors, just got a string of rejections, and then just thought, it's not going to work, and left it. And then years went by, and I ended up writing nonfiction. So I went straight into the Second World War and First World War history books as something to do outside of my day job. Then War Thunder came along, so I when that was started before it was released, I contacted them and said, here's my background in writing about Second World War aviation. And so started the consultancy stuff with them. That then led on to Warlord Games, who had signed on with Osprey for Bolt Action. And when I went back to Osprey and spoke to them about, after I'd kind of done the course of stuff with War Thunder, we got talking about other ideas, and they said, well, now you've done something a bit different on the computer game side of things and multimedia experience. And we spoke about Bolt Action. I got in touch with them, and then I wrote campaign books for Bolt Action. So I went straight in writing rules. So I'm still at the point where kind of back when I was 18 at university and really wanted to write sci-fi and fantasy, I'm nowhere near it. It hasn't happened. And then kind of looked up, and Warlord then moved into Gates of Antares. And so I was like, wow, it's kind of come full circle. That's what I wanted to do years ago. So I ended up, writing a novel for them via Winged Hussar. So Winged Hussar Publishing, a standalone company who kind of represents all of these other wargaming companies who don't have their own publishing house. So Winged Hussar will come along and say, here's us. Strike a deal, and then we'll write the official licensed canon novels for it. So I spoke to them, said I'm already on Warlord's books. They were great, but I still had to enter the competition with everyone else, a short story competition, and I was one of the winners. And then an opportunity for a novel came out, and that's when I went to Gates of Antares. And that's kind of what started it all. Very long-winded answer. I'm painfully aware. I'm sorry. And then Kings of War came after that, and Infinity after that.
And what in particular drew you to writing military fiction?
I guess just growing up, it's always that's been the fiction I always liked reading, and it was just always more exciting to have that kind of action element to it, and that can be across such a broad brush of different backgrounds. It can be anything from real world to sci-fi and fantasy, and even within the real world, you can look at any kind of historical era, and I think they've all got their different areas which are particularly interesting. So yeah, I think it was that side of things really, which again lends itself into the wargaming side of stuff as well, which is ultimately tabletop wargaming tends to be very military.
So tell us, how does a project like this come to be? Who approached who?
Right. You'll be glad to know none of these are quick one-word answers. It's quite a long answer. Right. Brandon is my editor at Winged Hussar Publishing. Winged Hussar had been representing a lot of tabletop war games long before I got in touch with these guys and started working with him. And but the thing is, it's like just the way it's a small family company. So most of my correspondence with Brandon isn't professional; it's personal. We're friends. We talk about everything from movies we've seen to both of us loving like Final Fantasy VII and stuff like, and everything in between. And yeah, he was talking to me, he was chatting to me one time, and he said they had just signed another major player in the wargaming community to say, we've just signed on another franchise. And I think I said something on the lines of, wow, I said something on the lines of either, is it Infinity, or wow, I think you've got everyone except Infinity now, something along those lines. And I can't remember exactly how the conversation went, but that was that. And then 2 weeks later, he came back and he went, yeah, we've got Infinity. And it's like, great. And so so it was Winged Star Publishing who approached Corvus Belli and said, here's us. Here's all the other franchises we've represented in the past few years, and that they were really interested in working and making stuff work. And Corvus Belli, I wasn't party to that conversation. I've only kind of heard it secondhand, but things ran on rails, from the word go. They were very interested. And, all involved parties could see that it's a benefit to everyone. Everyone wins. So that was Infinity. And then a few weeks later, Brandon came back and he said, so are you going to write one of the opening novels? I was like, absolutely not. The thought was terrifying because I didn't play Infinity, but I knew of it. And there were people at a gaming club I was at for a good few years who played it. So I'd seen it on tabletop. I'd seen books. I'd seen the websites. I'd flicked through the lore. And I was aware that the lore for Infinity is absolutely mind-blowingly deep. So as an outsider looking in, there is no way I'm going to touch that. That is far too big a job. It needs someone who knows Infinity inside out. And whilst I know wargaming relatively well, I don't know Infinity. So yeah, the answer was a categoric, I don't want to be awkward here, mate, but no, this one's not for me. And then Brandon did what he always did, which was be really nice and say, please. So I said, okay then, and committed to it. And then Corvus Belli were in touch and sent me a whole load of stuff, which was like really generous, but made it worse because once you've got all those books in front of you, you go, I thought the lore was deep, but I didn't realize it was this bad. And then you got to start the whole process of, right, I need to come up with a storyline, and I need to take these thousands and thousands of pages of lore books from the game, from the RPG, from everything, and I need to pick a tiny little corner and just blitz that. Not do the whole thing, just find a couple of factions and a geographical area and say that's where this is, and not step outside that, so I can try and do it some justice. And that's how it all started.
As part of your research for Downfall, did you actually play any Infinity? Did you watch anyone play a game at all?
Yeah. It goes back to Kings of War. When I first started writing for them, the first thing, and I did exactly the same with Infinity, first thing I'll do is look through the websites, look at the different factions and say, which faction would I collect? And then, because having the same gamer thing that we all have, the gear acquisition syndrome, which faction would I collect instantly becomes which faction have I just clicked on buy now and I'm now collecting. So I bought a whole load of. I was first drawn to Ariadne. That's kind of where I wanted to go. I thought aesthetically they look really cool. But then when I read about the background, I thought Pano is actually. I prefer the backstory of Pano. So I switched focus and went, yeah, that's what I'm going to write about. So I bought a load of Pano stuff. And as I'd done with Kings of War, assembling it and painting it, you start to see the detail which matters. You might never mention these little details in the armor and the weaponry. It might never come up in the text, but you kind of get a feel. You know what the characters look like. You know what equipment they've got. Just small things like Hospitallers, they've all got a sidearm. Little details like that, which even though it's in the specs, it's in the rules. I kind of try and learn the aesthetics and the models, the miniatures before I learn the game system. So yeah, I got a load of those, and then it came to playing. But lockdown was in, so that was a problem. So that was when, unfortunately, my family were told, "Yeah, guess what? You're going to learn Infinity." And so we were just doing games back here to try and learn the basics. And then lockdown was, coming and going and easing, and so I had the chance to go and play against other people who knew the game very well. And again, it's really important. I know some people in the writing community are able to write novels for franchises without playing, and they pull it off, and that's great, and well done to them. But for me, I kind of want it to echo the game, so the dice rolls have to be important. If you don't want a Fusilier going one-on-one against a tag and just taking it down because it looks cool. It's like, no. That's more than really lucky rolls. That's nearly statistically, sorry, in the laws of probability, it's nearly impossible. So it's about saying, yeah, of course, you want some really cool stuff where a player of the game would read the book and go, well, that's some good rolling. But you don't want it to be, even within a fictitious context, you don't want it to be unbelievable. So yeah, I think personally, you've got to play the game. You've got to try and understand it, and you've got to try and make your action scenes replicate what happens on the tabletop.
How much do the game's mechanics feature in Downfall itself?
A fair bit, but not 100%. So one of the things which stood out to me about Infinity, which I really loved, some of the guys at my gaming club said was one of the things that put them off it and they didn't like, but I think is one of Infinity's greatest strengths, is the activation system, whereby you can make one character go banzai and do loads of stuff, which I absolutely love, because it's like, okay, we're moving away from systems like bolt action, which we're trying to, or Flames of War, really good example, is trying to replicate real platoon level combat. And we're now going full action movie and saying, you can have one character just do incredible things. And yeah, there's a bit of that in Downfall. There's a few bits where the four main characters, two of them in particular, you'll kind of a player of Infinity would go, okay, so that's a character that's been used 3 times on the bounce and just does incredible things. So yeah. The mechanics, I really tried to replicate the having an active and reactive player, things like that. I tried to make that, to weave it in rather than to kind of smash people in the face and say, look at this bit here when this guy rolled a 4. Yeah, you don't want it to be that blunt and that boring. But yeah, the systems, I really hope it will stand out a bit. Yeah.
Compared with writing for other gaming systems, did you find Infinity more challenging to write for?
Yeah, in a word, yes. Yeah, I'd say this is the most difficult novel I've written. Not there's that many. At the time we're recording this, we're about just over a month away from Downfall potentially being released. And it will be my 4th released novel, but there are 2 more which, because of the pandemic, have been delayed. So whilst it's my 4th released, it'll be the 6th one I've written, and it was the most difficult, definitely, and that was it was lore related, just because there is so much. But it's the most rewarding. It's the most fun. I'll get off the fence. If I had to pick one system and said, no, you got to stick your colours on a mast now. You're picking one system and you're writing for it, I would pick Infinity. It's been the most fun to do. And also, Corvus Belli have been fantastic to work with. What's been really, really eyebrow raising has been, I'll come up with, like, I started off with what I thought, these questions, they're going to be awkward. I'm gonna sound like I'm trying to stir up trouble. So I'll be like, okay, combi rifle, Fusilier combi rifle. Can you tell me the manufacturer, the model number, the caliber of the round, and just in case it comes up, how many rounds per magazine, and just got a file back saying basically, Pano Military, here is every weapon system, every manufacturer, every caliber, everything. They've thought all of this through. It is all there, even details which haven't appeared in the lore books, in the RPG. Everything is already there in case it's needed. So every single question I asked Corvus Belli, there was never a, give us a few days, we'll think about that. It was always bang, here's your answer. There is so much heart and soul has gone into this game from Corvus Belli. It's just it's a privilege to be tagged onto the side of it with this novel, to be in this tiny little bit, creeping in on the periphery of this thing which these men and women over at the company have just put so much effort into. So yeah, it's been great. It's been the hardest to write to, definitely, but it's been the most enjoyable as well.
Did you come across any details that surprised you as you were writing the book?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there was Hospitallers. The main character in Downfall is a Hospitaller, and so basically we're looking at a religious warrior clad in armor with a sword and a gun, in a sci-fi tabletop game, and this all of a sudden starts to sound a bit familiar. And I'm thinking, okay, what we don't want is charging at enemies with a chainsaw shouting for the Emperor. It's been done. And I got to admit, Games Workshop and 40K, the visual, the aesthetics are mind-blowing. I absolutely love them. But whilst the novels are really, really popular, and that's great because everyone should, love their own thing, the novels aren't for me. I think they're really well written, but that grim, dark thing, I don't personally like it. I respect it, but it's not for me. So I thought there's a twin-edged thing here. On the one side, I don't think that Holy Order knights in Infinity should be like Space Marines. I think from a marketing point of view, you would want to distance yourself. But then from a personal point of view, I prefer reading about people with fears and flaws and humanity and sympathetic characters. And that's what I started to write with the main protagonist in Downfall. And when I started to think, okay, so they're not always going to be wearing armor. So, well, they are holy order warriors. Do they wear robes? I don't want them to wear robes. That's been done. And you want to step away from that. So I'm like, well, different color combat fatigues, a beret, militaristic stuff. And I put it forward to him, and Corvus Belli came back and just went, yeah, that's exactly what we imagined. And that was really surprising, this moment of, by luck rather than judgment, I'm on exactly the same page as these guys. And also when I said, here's this character who is young, days out of training, making loads of mistakes, lacking confidence, all the stuff that you would expect from someone in their early 20s who is stepping out of a very, very, very rigid, doctrinal world into the real world. And, it's going to be like rabbit in a headlights moment. And that is not what Space Marines are ever depicted as. So I wanted to do something very, very different. And it was a real surprise to me that Corvus Belli were like, yeah, cool, that's kind of, that ties in with what we see a young, inexperienced Holy Order warrior as well. And so yeah, that's chapter one. And that was the biggest surprise, that straight away they come back and go, yeah, cool, we're on board with your vision and what you want to do. And it just got better and better from there. Every time I strayed from the beaten path and started to do stuff which didn't quite work, they would come back and say, what you're doing here doesn't quite work, but we can see what you're trying to do. So here's a way you can make it work. Change it to this and your story still works. So that there was never a no from Corvus Belli. It was always you haven't quite got it. You need to do this, and then you're back on track. Just gentle taps on the rudder bar, and it was all fine again. So yeah, I think that they were the biggest surprises in terms of how well it worked, and also just how much humanity and vulnerability there is you can put in these characters, which are just powerhouses of statistics in the game. and aesthetically, the model and the artwork, they just look mean. But you can still humanize them and say that that they've been underneath all the armor, that they're real, vulnerable, mortal people, and that Corvus Belli were cool with that. That was the biggest surprise.
How much direction did Corvus Belli themselves give you in terms of the story that you were to tell?
Right. I had a overarching idea, which was basically, here is a platoon of infantrymen, Fusiliers is going to work, and I want a elite but zero experience Holy Order warrior attached to them, and that they are in the middle of nowhere, ideally in a jungle. I had, just the way I was visualizing it, and they have been tasked to protect a research facility. And so I pitched it to them, and they went, yeah, we can make it work. And then they came back and they said, yeah, it needs to be on Paradiso. And it was like, okay, cool. And then you start looking at the map, and they were sending me back the map saying, with a big X on it, saying the story you are planning, set it here. And then you go, great, I can now visualize how far it is to the border, to the nearest city, to how far away threats from alien forces are on that planet. And then when I'm kind of saying, okay, here's what I want the big reveal, the big secret to be. And Gutia at Corvus Belli was coming back saying, nah, you're thinking too Star Wars. You're thinking hundreds of planets, thousands of planets. It's not how infinity works. And he said, okay, you want a big reveal. And then said, read pages, whatever to whatever in this book. And I reckon you'll find your big reveal in there. And so there was just all these, I knew the story I wanted to tell, but Corvus Belli showed me how I could tell it within and keep it faithful to infinity as they know it and own it. So yeah, it was. I was really, really happy with the way they did it, because they gave me complete freedom to do what I wanted to do with characters, even to the point where one of the 4 characters, who's a strategic security division operative, so a hexer. I was like, I want to write a hexer. I think that's going to work, but aesthetically, not in the way the miniature does, and a little bit aside from the way that you've described it in the book. So something similar to that. So they went, yeah, cool. And just within a few days, I said, yeah, we've created a subdivision of strategic security, which will fit your story. So that is now a thing. Go ahead. You can do what you want. So that they were creating lore as I went. I needed. There's one scene where there's a lull in the action. Some of the soldiers are injured. They end up getting taken away from the front lines. They're rotated through, and a new platoon is put in place, and they're pulled out for rest. So it's like, I need a city. And they went, yeah, cool. Bang, on the map. We've created one there. That's now canon. There's a city there for you. So they could not have been more accommodating. They were absolutely fantastic.
You've alluded to the fact that there's a bit of frontline action, but there's also a bit of leisure, recreation, kind of non-frontline action. As you explored the life off the front line for these characters, did other games within Infinity pop up? Might Aristea make a bit of a cameo?
Yes, Aristea is referenced a couple of times. There's only like 2 chapters in the middle of it. Most of it is on the front lines, but there is just this brief respite in the middle where people are kind of recovering from their wounds a bit. And I wrote one scene where one of the main characters, who's now he's away from it, meets up with his father in a sports bar. And the first time I wrote it, there was kind of football on in the background, and then I actually saw one of your YouTube videos on Aristea, and then I bought it and started playing it, and it was like I then went back to Corvus Belli and went, yeah, that sports bar scene, I want to completely rewrite it and make it so it's about Aristea in the background. And they were like, yeah, that's better, do that, definitely. And things like that, Aristea do feature. The characters as well who exist already in the universe. One of them cameos in this story. and another two Aristea fighters are mentioned. One is a kind of in a, in fact, a number of them are, but there's one, the main protagonist has crossed paths with a Aristea character in their background at some point, which is something that, again, Corvus Belli said, what would work really well for your main character if they had at one point been assessed and trained by Shona. So it's like, okay, cool, we can do that. And there was never anything insisted by Corvus Belli. There was always a, do you reckon you can weave this in? And the answer is always going to be yes. It was Aristea. When I stop and think of it, now you've asked the question, features a bit more than I originally planned, which is great because I got to admit I play Aristea more than I play Infinity. I really love that game.
In the bits I've read, Pano features very predominantly. Is this a Pano-only novel?
From the point of view of character perspective, it is purely Pano. However, there needs to be an adversary, and that's Yu Ching. What the book is about is a border dispute between Pano and Yu Ching, with O12 menacing over the top of it and kind of mediating but threatening at the same time. So O12 are not, in terms of the fighting, you never see O12. Pano, it's the vast majority is from the point of view of Fusiliers. And in the original draft of the synopsis I put forward, the main characters were all going to be Fusiliers. Corvus Belli kind of, not their words, these are very much my words, kind of came back and said, but these are the red shirts, these are the stormtroopers, these are not your, they said, if you're going to do Pano, you want to get a Holy Order Knight in there. That's where the glamour is. So it's like, yeah, cool, can do that. But what I didn't want to do, it's easy to fall into the trap of going, here's an army list, here's so many cool concepts, shove them all in, get them all. And then you dilute the impact of them. So Fusiliers, the vast majority of the characters, certainly the secondary characters, are Fusiliers. And then likewise, again, when you look to Yu Ching, it's mainly Zanshi, but also then Tiger Soldiers and Terracotta Invincibles and stuff like that. But I didn't want to do all of them because it just kind of gets a bit, it dilutes the impact. Instead of going, let's just pick a few and really hit hard with them, instead of just every single time you turn a page, here's another model, which I don't think works as well.
Sounds a bit like my list building. Now, you have a great opportunity, but also a huge challenge here. I don't know if you ever felt the weight of responsibility in delivering the first ever Infinity novel, but I suppose that also came with completely open roads to tell whichever stories you wanted. Was it challenging deciding on which story to focus on when you had so many available?
Yeah, it was difficult, and exactly what you've alluded to there, that kind of perception of responsibility. Yeah, I definitely felt it for two reasons. One is you write these books. So as I said, I've got my primary job. This is very much a kind of hobby, something I'm passionate about. So my objective with doing this is to have fun and entertain people by, I hope, telling a good story. But in Infinity players, like any other system, perhaps more than most systems, I think are really, really loyal to this franchise. And you don't want to let them down. So you come in as an outsider. There are some games, Bolt Action I know relatively well because I've written 5 campaign books for it. So I think I would classify myself as an insider with that. Infinity, I knew I'm an outsider coming in, and there's a million major league, multi-billion-pound franchises out there which have had a lot of upset fans because an outsider has come in and meddled. And I was absolutely adamant I wasn't going to do that. I didn't want to say, here's what I think infinity should be. It has to be, here's what infinity is, and I'm respecting it. And so I didn't try and put my own slant on anything. I just tried to say, look, here's the law, and I'm going to write this story within it. So that was the first thing in terms of that weight of responsibility, is you owe it to the fan base. It's their world, and you want to get it right. And then the second thing is it's the opener. It's the first one. And that the weight of responsibility is pretty big. But then there's been the mangas, and they got sent my way. And I thought that's what I actually started with. I thought, let's start there, because, you know, it's picture books. How hard can it be? And then read it. It's like, okay, these are deep. These are really complicated. And actually, I need to brush up on my lore before I even attempt these, because there's I think there's a bit of assumed knowledge with those. There's a bit of okay, you already get the backstory. You can't just start there. They're very, very well written, I think, but pretty deep. So yeah, I'm not the first, I suppose, in that respect. But then, so it's got, okay, there's also the social media interaction that I occasionally was going on Facebook and going, okay, here's me, I'm writing this, just so you know, and try and get a bit of community feedback of what people like and don't like, what they want and don't want. And then you realize quite quickly that everyone wants something different, and that you're right. I'm kind of like, okay, I'm already committed to this path. And a lot of people are saying, here's what I want. And you go, great, that aligns. And then there's other people saying, I really, really want to know about the highest levels of interfaction rivalry and the governmental relationships, and how, you know, the top echelons of the politics between Aleph, O12 and Nomads. And you're like, yeah, cool. There's three factions I'm not really touching. And I'm writing this about soldiers with the, you know, the equivalent rank of private and corporal, not about politicians. And you know, these people who that's what they want, it's like, you're going to get none of it from me, and you start to feel quite bad about it. But fortunately, I'm just one guy who's writing this, and there's several others, and there's other stuff coming. And whilst there's some franchises where I suppose limited in scope, and so you are going to get a little bit of samey stuff, I don't think it's going to happen with Infinity. I think every novel that comes out from a different author will be so different, because the lore is massive. And I know the second novel, I don't know much about it, but I know enough to know there is zero crossover between mine and the second one. And that second one is not about the tactical level, about platoon and section attacks and all that stuff. It's nothing to do with that. And so those comments on social media saying, here's what I like, and me feeling a bit guilty, thinking, oh, geez, you're not going to get it from me. I think they will from the second and third novels. So I think it will be. I think Winged Hussar are going to cover it nicely. And I think Corvus Belli are working really, really hard as well to make sure the web is being cast quite broad. So that weight of responsibility gets lifted a bit, knowing that there's other good stuff coming behind mine.
Have there been any discussions about a follow-up or a sequel to Downfall?
Well, a few things have to happen for there to be a sequel, which is, first and foremost, the most important thing is that the community need to want one. Now, I think from what we've seen on social media, there is enough appetite for novels in general. So you know, this is above my pay grade. I'm just a little worker bee in this whole thing, but I'm confident that without treading on toes at Winged Hussar, I can say that you know, the plan is for this to be a steady trickle into potentially a little bit more of Open the Taps and a bit more of a stream of Infinity novels. I think that's the plan. In terms of from me, I don't know. It all depends on the reception, because and a lot of that's going to come from feedback, from reviews, from comments on Facebook, and you know, things like Goodreads and Amazon, stuff like that. That's when the companies involved will look at, say, me and say, right, do we want this individual to write another Infinity one? So what it needs is it needs the community, it needs the fans to want it, it needs me to want to do it, which I definitely do. I definitely would want to do more. And yeah, it needs Corvus Belli to want it. So it needs kind of everyone on that same page to want to do more. But then, so let's say I do a second one. Would it be a sequel? Would it be the same characters? Well, no, they all die at the end. Just kidding. Just kidding. No. There are no spoilers. No, they don't all die. There would be scope for sequels. There's four main protagonists in this. There are two who I think could support at least another novel. So two of the four main characters I think, with a bit of work with Corvus Belli, come up with follow-ups for, if the demand is there.
Having read Betrayal and Outrage, they feature characters we already know from the model range. Is it fair to say that you've explored a group of characters that are not part of the model range as of yet?
Right. I think as I said, there's the four protagonists, and if I were just to kind of do a broad brush overview of some of these without any spoilers or anything. So two are Fusiliers. One is a platoon commander who's a lieutenant, and the other one is her deputy, a sergeant. And in my mind, in terms of the miniatures that are out there, the stats and the army lists that are out there, that is a Fusilier lieutenant, and that is because again, Cochrane, the sergeant, the character, he's got an indigo background. So again, at the bottom of the list, when you go into the Indigo Spec Ops side of things, and you can start to advance with it, those characters and make them a bit more unique. That's Cochrane. That's the concept. So whilst on the one hand, there's this temptation to come out with really cool new ideas, you still want to support the franchise. As I said, it's all about respect to something that exists. It's not about overlaying a filter of here's what I want. It's about saying so much work has gone into this, you want to support it. Two of the four characters are Fusiliers. They are, if you were to get the model and the stats, that it is to represent them. Then there's the Hospitaller, who is again straight out of training, so could easily be represented by that. And then there is the Hexer, who is not. That is something which is new. That is something that is different. That is the conversations I had with Beauty. I was saying kind of, well, if you were to imagine hexes as a kind of deniable operations in a black ops kind of way, this is a more military subdivision. This is a uniformed rank service number, but equally as dark kind of part of it. And that's what the character of Beckman is. She's a kind of more militaristic version of hexes as they exist already. So if you were to kind of transpose that onto the tabletop, the stats would be different. I suppose is what I'm getting at with that. There would be different strengths and weaknesses. It would be a different unit in the game. Whereas the other three, you could play them as they are. They are represented. But then it comes back to, as you said, that there are characters that already exist. So the named characters that already exist, there's only one who crops up in a couple of scenes and has a good smattering of lines and these cameos and appears. But he has no combat scenes. He's there as a kind of mentor figure to the main character.
The story itself follows someone that's fresh out of training and new to the front line. Was that intentional so that people who aren't familiar with the law of infinity could follow this journey and acquire knowledge very easily? Would this be characterized as a great entry point for someone who wants to get into the law of infinity but doesn't really know a lot about it?
Oh, it's like you've seen through all my tricks. It's exactly that. Yeah, it's a tried and tested trope. I mean, it's nothing. It's not a new idea I've come up with by any stretch of the margin. But exactly as you say, if you have a character who is new to this stuff, you can explore this stuff through their eyes. Because what you don't want to do is have walls of narrative where you just go, here's an info dump, bang, here's loads of stuff. But by having a freshly qualified character, you can drip feed it in as they are discovering stuff. The reader can discover stuff. So yeah, it's not a new or clever writing technique. It's a well-trodden path of doing it this way. But yeah, that was very much the idea of have the main protagonist be new to it, so you can. In terms of what you ask about, does this work for someone who doesn't know Infinity? That was the I hope so. That was the aspiration. I've written it assuming nothing. There is no assumed knowledge from the reader whatsoever at any level. So at that level, I think a real lore junkie for Infinity might find it a bit pedestrian. But that was the plan. This wasn't to hit people who know whole sections of lore from the RPG source books inside out. That wasn't the aim. It was to try and make it as accessible to as many people as possible. So I haven't had many people read through it so far, but a couple who don't know Infinity have followed it, so that seems to work. And Brandon, who only an hour before we went to recording has just sent me back, his the big set of notes for the next edit. He was not familiar with Infinity. And that was the thing that I said to him. As I kind of submitted it to him in an email with just the simple phrase, "Best of luck," thinking, you've got to try and understand this. And if I've got it wrong, you are not going to be able to follow this because Infinity has complicated lore. But he said, "Nah, there's stuff we've got to change." And as always with Brandon, he has this uncanny ability to see through the writing, to kind of look at the next step and go, it's not about changing this to what I want, it's about changing it to make it better. And he's brilliant at that. And all of the things he wants to change that I've come up with, I look at it and go, oh yeah, your idea is better than mine, let's do that. But yeah, he does not know Infinity at all, and he said he could follow it. There was no lore questions at all. But that's not a credit to my writing, that's a credit to the input from Gutier at Corvus Belli, because he read the whole thing word for word and put footnotes on the whole thing to A, make it 100% law compliant, but B, so that it makes sense. So if an outsider to Infinity can read it, that's because Corvus Belli have made that a possibility.
Wargaming is often an avenue for escapism for many people. Do you feel that your novel adds to that level of escapism for those that want it?
I think it depends on the individual, and you could almost. I'm grossly oversimplifying here to say if you take two war gamers, one might be someone who goes, you know what, I'm not interested in lore, but the stats, the numbers jump off the page, and they may go, yeah, it's a beer and pretzel game. I just want to get together with my mates. I think that the aesthetics of this game is cool. I understand the system. I just want to play it, and that's great. And that's a real cool place to be. Then you go to the other end of the spectrum, which is to be completely immersed in the setting of it. To go, I didn't pick my faction because it suits my play style. I picked the faction because I'm captivated by the backstory, and because the miniatures look cool, and because I like the cause they fight for. I want to be the bad guy, whatever it might be. And I think that latter group is what this is aimed at. And I really hope it does. I really hope it does add to it. I think the sort of, and again, on all game systems, you kind of talk to people who play them, and some people just go, yeah, it's a cool game. Some people will have names for their army leaders and a backstory in their heads. Doesn't need to be anything overly complex, but they they get humanized a little bit, and it's that disappointment when you get a model taken out in a game, and it's not because it's a high value model, it's not because it's got amazing weapons and a high points value, it's because it's one of your favorite models. And so I think to that sort of player, to that kind of narrative immersive player, that's what this is aimed at, and I hope it adds. I hope it adds to Infinity, and that's certainly the plan. Yeah, another long-winded answer. Sorry.
I find it curious because as the first story that is being written, or the first novel that is being written, you have a lot of responsibility, but you also, as I've said, have open road. No other authors have painted you into a corner with various elements of the story and the world. Have you painted any future authors into any corners at all?
There is a tiny bit of painting into a corner, but most of it is non-committal. It would be the quick answer. So an example would be, I've mentioned a few times, the book is based around a platoon of Fusiliers. So it's like, cool, what is a platoon of Fusiliers? So that was one of the things where I said to Gautier, is there a formalized platoon structure? And he said, no, not at the moment. So I said, okay, could I make one up? So I came back and said, I think a platoon structure should be based I based it very much on modern day. Well, initially, because the Pano background, a lot of it has that Australian heritage link into it, and the Australian military has a lot of similarities with the British military. So it's like, well, brilliant. I'm on common ground there. So I looked at the modern British rifle platoon. I went, how do we make it a bit more, space, sci-fi, zappy, and just change things up a bit. So I came up with here's a HQ, here's 3 sections, break them down into a rifle group and a gun group and all this sort of stuff. So it had a little bit more World War II influences. And I sent it back to Gautier, and he came back and went, yeah, first thing, I don't want 4-man fire teams, I want 5-man fire teams because that replicates the game better. Brilliant, we do that. So between the two of us, batting and balling, we came up with this is the law, the canon platoon structure for a rifle company within the Fusiliers, and that's kind of like, I guess, now set in stone, and that's and we'll put that on the first page of the book so that the reader can kind of look at it and go, okay, so when there's all these tactical call signs between 0-1 calling 1-2. It's like, well, who's 0-1? Oh, okay, so that's the sergeant from the HQ section, and then 1-2 is going to be your second Fusilier in number 1 section, and all that, and then you can look across that and go, okay, so in terms of their table of equipment, what are they armed with? That guy's got a combi rifle. This one's got one with a grenade launcher attached to it. This is the team's hacker. This one, has got a heavy machine gun, and everything is there in a very rigid, boring, militaristic way, laid down. But it means that the story can work that way. Does it mean that then when you then take that to the field on tabletop, you've got to do that? Nah, absolutely not. You do what you want and have fun with it. But yeah, if anyone now, I guess, were to come and to write a story about Fusiliers, I've kind of screwed them over. They'd have to do that. So yeah, so there's a couple of bits like that, but other than that, no, not a great deal. Likewise with the Hospitallers, it's like, well, how long does it take to train a Hospitaller? Well, 4 years, because that's what we talked about. And there was another story we talked a lot about cubes. So soldier gets killed, he's got a cube. What's how many of them actually come back? What's the process? What's the difference between coming back and having another go or having an L host? What is an L host? Where does it come from? How much do they cost? What companies? So there is, of the 4 characters, one has died already and is back for a second go and has been through that experience. And so yeah, most of what I've put in there, which would restrict further authors, has come from Corvus Belli. But there's a smattering. There's a couple of bits I came out with, which in negotiation with Gautier, he said, yeah, cool. We're now at a place we're both happy. That's canon. So yeah, there's a bit, but not that much.
Was it challenging to bring technology and concepts from the future into a context that most readers would be able to understand and comprehend?
It started very difficult and progressively got easier the more we went into it, because you go in blind, and playing the games is one thing, kind of getting a good understanding of the rules, but then you go, okay, cool. How does a section of soldiers communicate? Because that's really important. Are they shouting to each other? What can they see? If a section leader wants to move their team to a marker, how is a marker designated? How do the other people in that section see it? And the opening 3 chapters fact, really, the opening first chapter lays that down. So I wrote an idea, sent it in, because the communication at the start of it between me and Corvus Belli was a lot more frequent. It had to be, to stop me going in the wrong direction. The further into the story I got, the bigger the gaps in the check-ins, because they were like, yeah, you've hit your stride now. You don't need to talk to us as much. But to start with, we were talking to each other a lot. And the first one I sent in, they kind of came back and they're very polite about it, but went, yeah, you're not sci-fi enough. They kind of said, the technology you're describing might be readily available in 50 years. You need to go more sci-fi. But it wasn't vague. It was, this bit here, change it to this. This is how it works. So yeah, the comm log, each soldier effectively having a contact lens, so that everything they see is put straight onto this contact lens, and it's acting like a head-up display in an aircraft would effectively. So they have this tactical awareness, this situational awareness at all times. And it kind of gets laboured in the opening chapter to say, here's how it works. And then I try to dial it back because it can clog up the pace after that. So once the reader's got, I get how these people are talking to each other and seeing things, you don't have to mention it as much. So I needed quite a lot of guidance on that because I wasn't sci-fi enough.
Was it difficult to understand how things like ammunition might work in the human sphere, for example?
Yeah. I mean, my experience of firearms is all very conventional. So I had to go and get my head in the books, not in a huge way, but a little bit, to understand a bit more about the two kind of major categories of caseless ammunition and how it works. But it does mean that quite a few cinematic moments of having a break action revolver which automatically ejects your empty brass with spiraling brass and smoke and all this cool stuff. Delete all that. That's gone now because all of these cinematic slow-mo bits in between the action. You can't do that because the ammunition's futuristic and hyper efficient. So that took a bit of a rewrite.
It's odd, isn't it? You've got caseless ammunition, but you've also got some big hulking character wielding a sword into battle.
Yeah, that part of it was tricky, and again, because it's like, well, justify a hospitaller. You've got a chap in this really thick armor with a surcoat, a red surcoat with a white cross in the jungle. And you're like, well, that is not a sci-fi concept. And then again, I had to explain to me, it's like, yeah, cool, because it looks nice on the minis and it looks nice on the artwork, but it's smart fabric, which means it subdues. So there is the technology there to say, when you're kind of pacing around a safe area, it will be bold red with a white cross. But as soon as you then set it up and you walk away, that bold red fades into an almost grey, or whatever it will be to kind of go with the background. So whilst it isn't enough to give you the special rules in game that are associated with camouflage, it's still got that sci-fi feel to it. So again, that was not in a huge way, but something I needed to write into the narrative to say, here's what is happening, even if I'm not going into how it happens, because A, I'm not clever enough to understand how something like that would happen, and B, I don't think the average Infinity player wants to know about fabric. So they're probably not going to be that into clothes, I guess.
That's fantastic. I love the idea of smart cloth because now it means I can paint my army in whatever colour I like and it's still tactical. But I'm curious as to which got more of a direction and steer from Corvus Belli. Was it the front line parts of the book because that's so closely tied to the game? Or was it the bits, kind of off the front line because that is relatively unexplored?
A bit of both, I think. I think it was about even. It was about even. There was more for the front line because there's just so much more, such a higher percentage of the word count is front line. And I certainly wouldn't want to think, anyone listening to this who goes, yeah, brilliant, gung-ho, guns, and what? You've written stuff about them being on leave. And it's a bit. There's a couple of chapters. But it's not much. But yeah, that bit I found hard to write. because there's just, again, concepts of how does this work. Cars, there's one where one character picks up another in a car, and it's like, yeah, but you're kind of now saying that because that character has a car, that is in Pano, in society, that is massively decadent. A Pano citizen would not have their own car unless they are enormously wealthy. What you would do, it's like an entire network of automated Ubers which are left controls. So if you want to get from A to B, you get on the comlog and you dial in and say, I want a vehicle to come and pick me up at this place. And an automated vehicle arrives. If you want that vehicle to have more style, you spend more money for that vehicle to come and get you. If you feel the compulsion to physically drive it, then you go and sit in the driver's seat and you put it in manual and you drive it yourself. But that wouldn't necessarily be the norm. So all this sort of stuff, which again, Corvus Belli have thought through and know it. But when you play in Infinity and just blowing stuff up, and you've got vehicles for cover, it's not necessarily thinking right. So that vehicle isn't owned by someone and is controlled by a left, and there's an automated traffic control system, and all this sort of stuff you've got to hash out. So yeah, it is in there, and I think I think other novels which come after mine will no doubt go into it in much greater detail. But there's a little overview. There's a little bit of here's when people are away from the action. Here's what life is like. A little bit of it.
Was there anything you consciously avoided tackling in this novel?
Yeah, a couple of things which leap to mind would be, which I think we've sort of touched on. The first thing was trying to crowbar in too much from the army lists. To saying, okay, there's players out there collect all these different factions. I don't want to let down people who collect nomads, but I have, because there's not even a single mention of nomads in there. There's nothing. So yeah, I didn't want to say, right, get everything in there. We need to address every single part of the fan base. So that the first thing was, just pick a few things and try and detail them. The second thing is that Infinity is a new one to me because it has real world politics and religion. And that's something you've got to be, I think, very, very respectful of. And so you've got Pano, which has got a large part of what filters into it is Australia and India as the first two real world nations that form the foundations and the power base of, and then everything else starts to filter in after it. So Cochrane, the sergeant, he's Australian. So there's Australian military slang, a smattering of it in there. You don't want him to sound like something out of Neighbours and Home and Away by calling people flaming galahs and saying fair dinkum and struth. So I avoided all of that as much as I really wanted to use it.
When I read the novel or parts of it and read that it was all Pano, I thought, here we go again. It's, the main faction gets all the attention, gets all the love. Were Corvus Belli very adamant that because they're one of the main factions, you had to treat them with care and respect? Or were you allowed to have a bit of freedom in how you conveyed their shiny faction?
A surprising amount of freedom. Yeah. There was no agenda overlaid by Corvus Belli at all. I either, again, by luck rather than judgment, I kind of got the balance right, or they were just like, yeah, you write this the way you want. I wanted it to be even. And Corvus Belli seemed cool with that. It was, and I even had a chat about it because of the way the book ends, and said, look, I want to change something just in case it looks that way. And Gutierrez said, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. We want it to be two factions that have had a fundamental disagreement that has ended up in hostilities, but it's not about one's right and one's wrong. So I and Brandon, having just finished reading it, I spoke to him about that only yesterday, and he said, yeah, that's how it comes across to him. It doesn't come across as the Yu Ching are the bad guys and Pano, kind of all of the Captain America in shining blue armor Boy Scouts. It doesn't come across like that. So hopefully readers will see that, because that was the plan. It was never about, making one faction seem better than another. It wouldn't be fair.
Is this a print release only book, or will there be digital versions and, dare I ask, maybe an audiobook further down the track?
Right. All of these tend to start, everything I've done with Wing to Star so far, the normal running order is, here's the print publication, shortly followed by the e-publication. And then there is the audio books do come out, but there's it's a more complicated process. So it takes a bit of time for that to happen. So, however, with the pandemic, the print side of this whole process has got a lot more delays. So whilst the aspiration and the normal running order is print, then e-copy, then audiobook.
Do you have a fixed release date at this stage?
Well, late March was the date we were all aiming for. And the last I heard, that would be one I would have to take away and go back to Brandon with, or to Vince, basically to Wing to Sar, and say where do we stand? Because whilst we're all aiming for late March, and we're all kind of staying optimistic and hoping for the best, I think realistically there will be delays with the print publication. But it may still be possible. It's not beyond the realms of possibility that the ebook will be out late March on the date we were looking for. So yeah, as we're recording this, with a bit of luck, we could be looking at 5 or 6 weeks. Audio book though, no, there's always a bit of a lag, a bit of a gap before that comes out.
In closing, is there anything that you want to say about Downfall as a project, or about anything as part of the journey that you've been on writing it?
It sounds a bit trite, but it is sincere, which is thank you to everyone who on the Facebook group has raised their hand and shared their opinions. Every single one of them gets read, every single one of them gets listened to. And without that guidance to say, look, here are literally the voices from the community saying, brilliant, these are the individuals who have shown an interest in the novels, and here's what we want. Without that, you're going in blind, and it's really difficult. But then when you get that, here's me, I've written 3 chapters, there's as it was when I first got stuck in, so there is loads of time to change the approach to this. And then you all of a sudden kind of get like close to 100 comments saying, here's what I like, here's what I don't like. That helped so much. And so a sincere thank you to all the people who have said stuff. And also just, I'm genuinely keeping my fingers crossed that I've done this right, because it's about doing it right. It's about respecting the system that you're trying to bring a different facet of life to. Corvus Belli have already brought Infinity to life in so many ways. So it's not about saying this novel will bring it to life. It's already got that life. It's about bringing a different facet of life to it. I hope I've done it right. Yeah, I guess that would be my final comment. There's a ton of us who have put in a lot of effort to this, and it's been about that, about doing it right. So we all hope we got it right.
I'm very excited for this novel, and I know much of the fan base is as well. Are there any social media channels that we can follow you on, or places where we can see your updates or get in touch if we've got any questions?
The easiest way to get hold of me is on, because it recently changed names, didn't it? The Infinity, the more popular of the Infinity Facebook groups. Yeah, so I'm keeping an eye out on that whenever I can. And I know the guys at Wing to Sar very much are as well, because that tends to be the best conduit to the fans, to the player base, is the Facebook groups. That tends to be where you kind of get most of the stuff. Wing to Sar Publishing have got a Facebook group, but that covers everything they do. So we get a bit of a bit of interaction there, but most of the interaction practically comes from the dedicated game Facebook groups. So yeah, if there are any questions about the one I've written, about future stuff, or just opinions, or just I'd like to see this, I'd like to see whatever, or as occasionally happens, some people have got, you know what, I want to have a stab, I want to have a crack at writing one of these myself. Then by all means, get in touch, and we'll be keeping an eye out.
Thank you so much, Mark. Really do appreciate you talking with us. If you do want to get your hands on a copy of Downfall, it's actually available on Amazon as a pre-order at the moment. So get your hands on it. If you like this kind of content, you want to see more Infinity-related stuff, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Very excited to see that Downfall actually get its release. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I'll be back soon.